Hey everybody, Lauren Khalil with Morning Chalk Up, and today we are chatting with Patrick Clark, Tommy Marquez, and Brian Friend. We're talking about the upcoming season, and Pat brought his furry friend with him while Tommy still has one on his face.
Oh, well,
Tommy.
Brian's got one on his
Brian
face.
too.
Tommy
The
looks
facial
like,
hair is a little overwhelming.
This might be the furriest episode of the Bottom Line ever.
Yeah.
Is it going to get any furrier?
I don't know. What are you contributing, Lauren?
Just the hair on my head.
Yeah, I was gonna say Brian's picks are usually pretty hairy, so.
All right. So we have some changes with the season this year. The biggest thing is we finally have the dates for the entire season super early. What do you guys think overall about some of the things you do like and don't like? Let's start with the positives. Patrick, you can start.
Oh, I like that. Really, not as much change for the elite division or the teams. We actually have a season that's kind of in line with the previous season, so no big changes. I like that.
Yeah. For me, there's a couple things to like about this. From a media and storytelling perspective, from a fan perspective, from an athlete perspective, all of this lays the groundwork for growth in the future in terms of being able to have a cohesive narrative throughout the season. I liken it to what we talk about in the gym all the time, right? Technique, consistency, intensity. Well, ironing out a structure for the season like we have now, where everything follows the same nomenclature in terms of open, quarterfinals, semifinals. It follows the same timeline. Adjusting the age group online qualifier to fit in the same framework as the semifinals as well, and also the consistency of, like Patrick said, from season to season. That allows us to ultimately build the intensity, like we talk about in the gym, and that would be an increased fan base, more cohesive storytelling on the media side, a better ability for athletes to plan their competition season and their year-round calendar to make sure that we're going to get the best performances year in and year out. So I think as a whole, this is laying the groundwork to be able to build off of growing forward. It's a much better a foundation for growth long term.
I don't know what else I need to say about that. The timeliness of the announcement is great for everyone. And, there's a couple things that they've added that I think Tommy painted it well. They're laying the groundwork for potential future growth and expansion into some other realms. Look, there's still the reality that the world is not completely open. And so there's certain things that maybe they were hoping to or planning to do or they'd like to do at some point down the future that just aren't viable or feasible to plan for this season. But by some of the additions to the season for the age group athletes, even the occupational games and the adaptive divisions, you can see that there's an intent to continue to expand in those realms.
And when we think about those divisions, that's probably where the biggest changes are happening for the season. Do you think that the changes are good for those divisions, or do you think that, long term, it's not as great?
Well, I'll go first here, I guess. I think that, for me, it seems like the biggest contention with the announcement is the reduction of the size of the divisions for the age groups. And I have kind of mixed feelings about that. From watching the age group athletes at the games this year, I'm not sure that every division needs 20 athletes there, but there are definitely some divisions that do. And I think that for the teenage divisions and probably divisions up through the ones that do the open workouts as prescribed, so up to 54 years old, there's definitely enough depth on both the men's and women's sides that they warrant having 20 spots at the games. You see Chad Schrader's written articles about this in the past. You see podium contenders and athletes coming out of the 11 through 20 spots in the age group online qualifier year after year. And it happened again this year, and it's not going to get a chance to happen next year. And I think that is a loss for the continued development of those divisions.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the structure of the season, what they added this year to try and hopefully compensate. And I think this year will be a interesting learning curve for that in particular. Dave went on the CrossFit podcast and mentioned that he is hoping to eventually have the age groups be able to stand on their own, have their own dedicated weekend, which is much more in line with a lot of other sports that you see, where if there's a significant population as far as like the talent pool, and there's enough interest, then being able to stand alone on your own is just a better overall structure in terms of like the event planning, the logistics, and being able to provide like a top tier competition experience for more people. So this is, to me, this feels almost like the one step back for two steps forward. Because I think with the additional competition stage, this is, blue skies. An additional competition stage is another filtering process that athletes will have to go through before they get to the games. So it's very possible they could do a better job of filtering the true top 10 getting into the games, whereas you only had one stage between open and games. Now you have effectively, by the time athletes get to the games, depending on what quarterfinals, semifinals go, anywhere from 15 to 20 tests instead of just 10 to filter out those top 10. And then at that point, I can see a more reasonable argument to having just 10. Although I do agree with Brian, I think some of the divisions, there's enough volatility to mandate more spots this year. But my hope is, and this remains to be seen, is that in the future, they'll be able to have their own weekend, their own competition, their own celebration. And that would open up to potential full fields of athletes, whether it's 20, 30, or somewhere in between if it's a sliding scale. The one thing that should be noted, though, is the logistical element of it. I think doing away with the age group pavilion put a significant logistical strain on the rest of the competition because you lose an additional competition field that was basically dedicated for those divisions. And now you're lumping all of those athletes in with the teams and individuals, and it's just condensing the time frame. So that was one of the things that I actually found interesting from Dave's perspective about the strain on the system internally at the games. And Brian can point to this a little bit because he's seen it as well. We might be falling in a very unique window where we just have to kind of hold our breath for a season, maybe, and let the planted seeds start to grow.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. Made excellent points on both, especially with them condensing the week, which used to be a week. Now, well, it went back to a week, so 4 days. It's just you're condensing every division into 4 days, and having 20 competitors there in each division, it's logistically it's not going to work out. Yeah, it's kind of a wait and see. I know there's a lot of chatter going on, especially in those divisions that have been affected by it, and they're upset, and they rightfully should be. But at the same time, I think they should just kind of maybe hold and wait and see what happens. I mean, I think ultimately it's going to be good for all the divisions. I don't think CrossFit's trying to hinder any of those divisions because they realize how big both of those. I mean, the teens and the masters, how important those are for the growth of the sport. We hit on it beginning of the year, or beginning to open, over 50% of the registrations came from the masters divisions, and that was just in the open. So, that's CrossFit knows that. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, this feels like a long-term play, right? Where after adding more spots at the games last season, you just want to continue to see that move forward. But my hope is that the eventual restructuring of this season allows for more athletes. I mean, with the two virtual formats, I think more athletes will be able to compete for longer in more tests in the long run. And the slight reduction in spots at the games this year will be a holdover year. And there are people that are rightfully going to be upset by that. And this does feel like a scenario where ultimately, 2-3 years down the line, this like reduction in spots is just going to be a thing of the past, and we're going to forget about it. So
when looking at the big picture and how Dave alluded to the age groups having their own CrossFit games, do you think that when it comes to looking at like spectators, from what you guys have seen, who you've talked to, do you think that they'll have you go to the games and there's thousands and thousands of people. Do you think that they'll have a turnout that can be comparable to the games right now?
Who wants to hit that first?
I'll hit it. No.
A loaded question, I know.
I don't think. I mean, we have to be realistic here. And I think 2019 is a perfect example of that. When you didn't have any fans in the stands watching the Masters athletes, so it's just so. that's just how things are, unfortunately, right now. But I don't. I think ultimately you're just going to have friends and family out there um, rooting for them, and that's fine. Because those are probably the most important people to those masters athletes and those divisions as well. They don't do it for the fans. Those masters athletes, they're doing it because they have fitness, and they're doing it for themselves. They're not doing it for for sponsors or anything like that. They're not like the elite. It's a different breed of athletes. So if you hear masters athletes or even teen athletes complaining about that, you kind of have to ask yourself, why are you competing? What are you doing this for then?
Mhm. I agree with Patrick there. I think there has to be a triaging of priorities in terms of like what is the most valuable assets to the demographic of age group athletes competing, right? As much as we have these teenage athletes that are crushing it right now, I think there are elements of long-term development that are much more important for masters athletes that they're doing some great things. Fan attendance may not necessarily be the priority, and it's more a celebration of what they're doing and being able to provide media coverage accordingly. So I think about like the athlete experience from having your own weekend. Now you get to have an entire competition where the programming and all of these things are centered around you, and you're getting a much more focused and a much more precise piece of attention as far as like the total experience of like a festival per se. But I also think the important element of it is the media coverage of it too. I think with a dedicated weekend of media coverage, there's an opportunity for if this Masters division can show, if the age groups can really show out the way they do in the Open and garner the attention that they need to, then having their own dedicated stream, having their own dedicated weekend should be a little bit better for them to not necessarily have to feed off of the runoff of the elite athletes, the individuals and teams. I think there's a weird kind of cross section of masters athletes saying, "Hey, we deserve more," but also wanting to be able to kind of feed off of the individual fanship and the atmosphere that the individuals and teams provide. For me, it's like, hey, let's give you your own weekend. Let's give you your own programming, your own athlete experience. Let's give you something where you can stand on your own 2 feet and build it into something that's uniquely yours.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at the end of the day, in the long run, that'll be a much more rewarding experience for them. And I think you have to look at other sports like jiu-jitsu, where Masters World, in particular, jiu-jitsu has a very high participation rate of Masters aged athletes because they start at 35 years old as well. And it's a long-term longevity-based sport. And so what you see is by having their own weekend at Worlds, instead of having to compete with the big names, it also encourages athletes to compete in both. So open division and also compete in Masters. So now you can have someone that maybe 35, Sam Briggs, competed at the games, then still go do her Masters weekend, and you get bigger names showing up as well.
I think Tommy brings up a good point, bringing up someone like Sam Briggs, is we're now getting to that point where a lot of these OG CrossFitters, they're hitting that Masters division. I think it's for that division to kind of grow, and not to take anything away from other Masters athletes who started as Masters, but these athletes, we missed it with Dan Bailey, but having the Dan Bailey, the Josh Bridges, the people we saw in the Legends divisions at Rogue, we need them competing on those stages to bring, maybe that's how you bring some of those fans in, because I mean, we saw that at Rogue. That's a popular thing. Rogue is very, they have the market cornered in that. But I mean, the games has got to do something to encourage some of those athletes to stick around. Like Rich Froning, he's probably going to retire at the end of this year. I mean, people would still show up to watch him compete, even in the Masters division. I mean, at 35 to 39, they had decent crowds. I mean, you got to see, James Hobart competing, Adrian Conway. You got to see how they did. I don't know. Brian, what are your thoughts on this?
He's been quiet.
I know.
No, it's you have to think the way that you guys are. It's a different task. If you're gonna have a weekend that's devoted to the age group athletes, you have to understand that the coverage is going to be different, the attendance is going to be different, and therefore your approach to what that weekend is should be different. And I think that, if that's the plan to do that in a year or two, then that's fine. They can look back and see how the Masters Fitness Collective was run, how it was covered, and check in with people who've done those things, or the Pit Team Fitness Ranch. This competition specifically for age group athletes exists. My concern is that CrossFit rarely reaches out to those resources for advice, and they always try to do it on their own. And And that's the thing that I think is sometimes holding the competitive CrossFit space back, is that people are competing with each other instead of learning from each other to continue to move everything forward faster. And therefore, people have to make the same mistakes over and over. So my hope is that if they're going to do something like that, that they would reach out to the people who have been doing it and learn from them, that they have been sending people to those events to observe the events and talk to the directors and ask about the decisions they've made surrounding broadcasting coverage, or post-production might be the best way to cover something like that. Because otherwise, you're just going to spend 2 or 3 years finding out what these people already have.
In talking with some of these age group athletes, do you think that as a group, this is what they want, their own CrossFit games where, they're the main stage?
That's tough. I think it's conflicted.
Go ahead, Tommy.
I was in talking with some of the age group and even some of the adaptive athletes. I think the thing they value most is the experience of feeling important, right? I think walking all those athletes getting that locker room experience that Noble provided for them this year, getting to rub elbows with their athletes and feel like they're at a professional environment at the top of their sport. I think is paramount to them, because this is supposed to be the Super Bowl for them. This is the reward for this year-long training and the season that spans multiple months and now 4 competition stages. So I think as long as whatever that looks like when they have their own event, they still get that same high caliber athlete experience on outside of the competition floor, the gear, the photos, the treatment, the check-in process, and all of those little details, and that same effort goes in, then I think ultimately they'll be all right with that, because those are that's what people get excited about, right? Getting that shirt jersey with your name on it and getting to be treated like a professional athlete for a weekend.
Patrick, you talk to a lot of the age group athletes. What kind of vibe have you been sensing from them?
It's kind of 50-50. And like Brian brought up, talking to the organizers, these organizers, ones that, December, you have Legends, who Legends tried to make, they actually succeeded in having a season that led to a qualifier. So they actually did do something like that. And then you had Master Fitness Collective, and you had the Pit Teen. These are all competitions where if you go and talk to these athletes, they enjoy being there and having the stage themselves. But like Tommy says, it doesn't match up to the experience they get at the games. Now, if they can find a happy medium between the two, where they get that experience that they would get the Noble experience, or some of the other things that happens, along that lines, I think they'll be fine with it. I think at the end of the day, as long as the athletes are being recognized, which they should be for their amazing feats, I think they'll ultimately be happy. And I think right now, because there's so many unknowns out there, that's why you have a lot of confused people or upset people, because they, especially us older people, we don't like change. Tommy knows, he's there now.
Set into the routine. That's what we like.
Oh man, yeah. I'm not a good example of that, man. I'm on the road every other weekend. So.
Yeah.
So now looking ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
I think what they need to do, though, is this might hit on something that you're bringing up later, but in terms of content, if CrossFit's ever going to have a television contract, they're going to need content. They just can't depend on the games and semifinals. So that's where I think these smaller events, if they can loop those in there, those could be some of those events they throw on on some of those CBS, online, or some, just something to have that could be part of those TV deals. Because CrossFit only events, that's not enough to get a contract. That's why you have the golf. They have so many other events that tie into the larger scale of things, and I think some of these smaller events, some of these specific teen or age group divisions, they can sell those to a CBS or an ESPN to help with a long-term TV contract.
Looking ahead to the season now, is what's the overall takeaway? Do you think that there's more good than bad, or do you think that CrossFit still has a long way to get to where people are happy at the season format?
People, it's in people's nature to see something and and immediately gravitate to the one thing that seems off-putting for them. So you just got to let that happen, and it's going to happen for, depending on the person, an hour to a day to a week, and then they're going to forget about it and move on, and they're just going to get on with whatever it is. Everyone will adapt to the season that's laid out before them. Everyone who's serious about competing will show up to compete. Tommy's right. The season is fine, and it actually allows for more stages along the way to prove that you belong at that pinnacle event that you want to be at. I think that we're on point here, that CrossFit has more than just this one season in mind when they're releasing this. At least that's what I'm going to choose to believe. I think that the intent is to, from the top has been to, communicate it to move the games forward and to consider it an important part of what the CrossFit ecosystem is. And I think that they have every intention of doing that, and people just need to be patient. People do not like being patient these days, but this is one that, especially considering what's going on globally and the fact that this is a global sport, you've got to be willing to wait it out for, at least till the hysteria around the pandemic or the drastic effects of the pandemic wear off enough for things to open fully. And at that point, hopefully we'll see some of the things that they've been sitting on and waiting for an opportunity to show us.
Mm-hmm. I feel like anytime you make a change, like significant changes like this, it's like showing up to your affiliate and seeing it's an assault bike or echo bike, workout. You walk in, you're like, oh, you're gonna gripe and complain, and it may not be your favorite, and you're gonna lament having to do it and it not being your favorite. But when you get done and you walk out of the gym, you're going to be happy that you did. You're going to be grateful for what happened, and then you're going to move forward with a better mindset. And I honestly just think that's how it's going to be, because I've been fortunate to, be involved in the sport in the community under 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 14 to 15, 17 to 18, 18 to 9, 6 format changes, including locations, and there were people, he may disavow it now, but one of my favorite quotes in 2011, when we first teased the idea for a worldwide open, a ton of people hated it, thought it was the worst idea ever. You know who was a vocal opponent of that? Jason Kaliba. Thought it was dumb, said it's never going to work. 2 years later, he's thrown down one of our live open announcement finales alongside Rich Froning, and it's a great idea. It's like it's in the world of instant gratification, it's always hard to see how the seeds are going to bear fruit. But I think with the stated objectives of the new leadership to try and grow the sport and also have that support the other areas of the company, you have to, at least from a base perspective, like Brian is saying, going to move forward with the mindset that they're trying to do what's best holistically for the sport and the community.
Yeah, there's two things. I mean, obviously, I'm a fan of what's going on, but there's two things I'm looking for in the next couple of months. Is one, when the rule book's coming out, because a lot of these questions we have can be answered hopefully by the rule book and whatever amendments and changes they make throughout the season. But if we're going to actually have a rule book that comes out in a timely amount of time that we can actually it's been a long
amount of time.
Timely manner.
Timely fashion that we can all sit there and just digest it and pick it apart. And also the second thing I'm looking at, and this is more for the elite divisions, is the prize purse for these other events. No one's talking about that. I mean, everyone's going into the season assuming that nothing's going to change. I hopefully it will. I mean, we had the interview you had with Sweeney where he said he only made $3,000 in a CrossFit season. And it's no way for these. They can't depend just on these off-season events.
Brian didn't like what you were saying, so he pieced out.
It's all right. He's used to it. I'm used to it.
No, but yeah, I think that the financial aspect is definitely that ongoing topic that, we as journalists keep talking about and you continue to hear athletes talking about. Do you think that CrossFit feels any pressure to keep increasing that pot, or do you think that right now it's just something that's going to be steady for the next couple of years until they get this new format under their belt?
Well, I think it depends on how people show up, right? If it's all a system that feeds itself. If more people show up and participate, that's more people supporting the sport, both financially and attention-wise. Attention brings more partners, and more attention brings partners with deeper pockets. And then, suddenly you have new partnerships like that. Like, a lot of people didn't like the Monster partnership at the games, but the reality is that Monster is getting involved in a variety of sports like the UFC, like CrossFit now, and they're going all in. They're trying to make serious investments in the sport. They're trying to support the athletes. They're trying to support the affiliates and all the different elements of it. And you can either, sit there and criticize that and be like, no, I just want to, like, they have to be, endemic brands and things like that. But you're never going to grow the sport to its full potential like that. And I think ultimately you're going to have to look outside of the community for non-endemic brands that are willing to adopt the CrossFit methodology and ethos and how they approach their brand, that will ultimately be able to make it a good partnership. A lot of people hated Reebok. A lot of the people in the community weren't around when the Reebok contract came through. A lot of people were like, who is this outside brand that is trying to become? And what did Reebok do? They built an affiliate in their headquarters. They brought in high-level coaches and athletes to teach and permeate that CrossFit ethos throughout their entire company, and they became CrossFitters at heart. And I think that has to be a recipe for success for other brands to come get involved into. You have to invest in the community. You have to invest in the athletes specifically as well. And if you do that and you're authentic about it, then I don't see why they can't be major contributors to the sport long term. So, and I think that will ultimately contribute to the increase in prize purse and all of these other things. Now, remember, and one thing that should be noted, CrossFit actually condensed the season format relative to past years. So, a 3-week open starting in February and ending in the first week of August is traditionally shorter than most seasons that we've had in terms of like total time demand. And it has been on par with more modern iterations. It's definitely shorter compared to the sanctional system. And one of the reasons they went back to that format specifically was to open the door for CrossFit licensed events and partner events like Wadapalooza, like Dubai, like Road, to pony up big prize purses for these athletes as well. That CrossFit had all of that in mind when they did that. So to think that there isn't some cohesion going on between all of this to provide a better ecosystem as a whole, I think would be very short-sighted.
Patrick, any final thoughts?
No, I think the only thought I have is Brian in costume was spot on for Slim Jim Randy Man Macho Savage.
Oh yeah.
He could have played as an extra.
That, he could pass for Conor McGregor now if he dyed that, I think.
Oh man, you missed my Jose Exotic Halloween costume in Austin.
Okay, so when's the facial hair staying until, or at least like this little get up?
So I think this little ditty, or this old thing.
Yeah, old thing.
I think this will probably stay for another week or so. I'm going to keep the mustache. I think it's just going to work its way up. It's like the reverse of those it's like the reverse version of those like ivy vines, those creeping ivy vines on brick walls. It's going to work its way up and it's going to stick around here. So I'm going to a wedding in December where all of us, all the guys have to wear tuxedos and mustaches per the groom. His
okay, all right. What does Tiff think about it?
She was
as long as you stop right there.
Oh yeah. So it's funny. It would already be here if it weren't for her.
Really?
I was on the phone with her.
She digs it.
While I was trimming it, and she said, I got to here, and she's like, nope, stop, leave it.
Oh, that's amazing.
The boss signed off, so I'm good to go.
She gets the final say.
Yep, exactly.
All right. So the bottom line is there's some pros, there's some cons with the new format, or at least having the schedule looking ahead to the season. But overall, the big picture, we think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and be patient. Be patient.
It's a
All right.
virtue.
Well, we will. It is a virtue, something we're going to do. Thanks, everybody, for joining the bottom line. Next time, Tommy Marquez is going to have less facial hair. So enjoy it while it lasts.
Mhm.
Thanks, guys.